Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for week 3 of our It's Personal series. I think we can all agree that superhero movies are pretty big right now. Between Marvel and DC, we have enough movies, video games, and spin-off shows to keep us entertained for years. My favorite would probably be Black Panther, and I know it came out a little while ago, but when that movie first came out, we were introduced to a hero with an incredible story. And in a matter of a couple of hours, it felt like the whole world was shouting together, "Wakanda forever." Now, before I saw this movie, I didn't know much about Wakanda, and I don't think I was the only one. That's why it's so great that the whole movie starts by telling the story of not just the character of Black Panther, but also his home, Wakanda. I think that's because the writers knew that in order to understand who Black Panther is, we had to understand where he came from. Did you know that the same thing is true for us? Just think about this. How many people in our schools, our neighborhoods, on our teams, or even in the room with you right now, do we just assume we know? We might feel confident that we know the stories of some people just because we know some things about them, like their name, or what they're good at, or what they're into when it comes to clothes, music, or friends. We think we know the full picture of who a person is because of what we can see. The way they act, the way they live, who their friends are, and so much more. That tells us what we need to know, right? Well, not exactly. See, we can know a lot about a person, but not really know them at all. There's a really good chance that there's more to the stories of the people around us than we see or know. Because here's what I know is true. Everyone has a backstory. In each and every person we think we know, there's more to their story than we can see. And if we really want to know someone, we have to understand where they come from. We have to see more than just what's on the outside. We have to understand the people, experiences, beliefs, and more that make them who they are. Now, I think you probably know what I mean because you have a backstory. You know that in your own life, there's more to the story. And you want people around you to recognize that too. Maybe you got angry and yelled at a sibling this week. You found yourself thinking, she'd understand if she knew about the friend drama going on in my life right now. Or maybe you turned an assignment in late and thought, my teacher would be more understanding if she knew the power got shut off at our house this week. Maybe you stopped texting a friend back and thought, they have no idea how depressed I am. If they did, they'd know why I'm not responding. See what I mean? That stuff going on that you wish other people would consider, that's your backstory. It's what you're dealing with. It's where you're coming from right now. And if you're like me, you wish people would try to understand a little more of it from time to time. But I think the question for all of us is this: do we live this same kind of grace and consideration to other people? I know I sometimes don't. The reality is that we rarely consider the backstories of other people. We don't often stop to consider where they're coming from, and because of that, we don't ever really personally know them. So how do you and I begin to see the backstory? How do we make an effort to understand where people are coming from? How do we make it personal? Thankfully, Jesus gives us a great example to follow. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at a cool story from Jesus' life. A couple of thousand years ago, he was traveling in ancient Israel and came across the town that was home to a well-known bad guy. I know we talked about superheroes earlier, but this guy was more of a supervillain. His name was Zacchaeus, and he was a tax collector, which basically meant he cheated his neighbors out of money just so that he could keep his wealth and status. Even though his reputation was rough, when he heard Jesus was in town, Zacchaeus went out and made an effort to see him. He wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus so much that he climbed a tree just to see if he could spot him in the crowd of people. What was crazy is that out of the entire crowd, Jesus noticed Zacchaeus up in that tree. And not only that, Jesus walked right over, called Zacchaeus by name, and told him to get out of the tree. Why? Well, for a reason no one expected: to hang out. Jesus wanted to hang out with Zacchaeus, to spend time with him, to get to know him. And not just anywhere, Jesus wanted to go to Zacchaeus' home. Let's take a look in Luke chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. I realize Jesus inviting himself over to Zacchaeus' house may seem a little strange to us, but it would have been absolutely wild in this culture 2,000 years ago. Zacchaeus was not a good guy, and everyone knew that. Jesus knew it too, but Jesus wasn't satisfied with only knowing about Zacchaeus. He wanted to take the next step of going right to where he lived. He wanted to really get to know Zacchaeus. See, there's something about where we live that says a lot about who we are. Where we live is usually the place where we're most comfortable. It's the place where our guard comes down and we can be who we really are. Can you imagine Jesus coming over to Zacchaeus' house and Zacchaeus taking off his sandals and kicking back with Jesus? Now, I'm not sure that's exactly how it went down, but one thing is clear. Jesus wanted to make it personal. Sure, he already knew everything about Zacchaeus, but he still decided to take a step into Zacchaeus' world to get to know him. Jesus made it personal with Zacchaeus when he took a step to understand where Zacchaeus lived. Visiting Zacchaeus' home meant that Jesus would get to know him in a very personal way. Jesus would get a glimpse into the important part of Zacchaeus' backstory. Of course, Jesus already knew his backstory because he was Jesus. But that visit showed Zacchaeus that he was accepted, backstory and all. See, where we live isn't just a physical address. It's a place that gives others a glimpse into our personal circumstances, our situations, and day-to-day lives. Where we live is a part of our backstory. It's the part most people don't typically get to see. And what's cool is that what Jesus did for Zacchaeus was an example of something that Jesus does for you and me too. While he may have walked into just a man's house that day, it gives us a small glimpse into the way God stepped into all of our lives when he chose to send his son, Jesus, to earth. The God who created the universe stepped into our world to understand where we come from, to show us how much he cares, to understand our stories in a real and personal way. It's personal because Jesus understands your story. He knows your stories because he knows where you live and what it's like to walk in your shoes. He doesn't just see and understand a little bit about you. He knows you because he knows your whole story. And he loves you no matter what. It's personal because Jesus understands our story. If the way we treat other people is going to be personal, then we have to choose to understand their stories, just like Jesus does for us. So where do we start? Well, before we get to know others, we might just need to become known ourselves. For some of us, our first step might be to acknowledge that Jesus wants to know you personally. In fact, he already knows you better than you know yourself. But you might need to invite him into your story. He wants to be a part of your life in a real and personal way. Then it might be time to let someone else into your story. Your step might be to share more of your story with someone else. Not just some random person or stranger, but someone who really cares about you. Someone you trust, who's already a big part of your life. Maybe you're in a place where you want to make it personal with others, the way Jesus did for you. You can do this by giving someone the gift of going second. In other words, you can be the first one to share. You can choose to share a little bit of your own backstory so that other people know it's safe to share some of theirs with you. When you share a little about what you're living with right now, it can give someone the courage to do the same. And when someone does share their story, make sure you choose to listen and ask questions to learn more. When you show someone you care by listening and wanting to know more, you show them just how personal getting to know their story is for you. Just imagine if getting to know the stories of your classmates, teammates, and neighbors was something you took personally. You'd start to see people for who they really are instead of who you think they are. You become known as a person who really cares, a person they can trust, a person who wants to know people in a real way. So remember, it's personal because Jesus understands your story. As we wrap up this week, I want you to think about this. What's one thing most people don't really know about me? Thanks, guys. It's awesome to see you, and have a good week.